Welcome to the fifth section of this video course, the programming examples. This section will show you different methods to query your database with different programming languages. So in this section, we will first have a look at programming with the common PHP MySQL I module. In a second video, we will be using a PHP database abstraction layer to query our database. Then, in the third video, we will be using Python to query our database. And in the last video, we'll have a look at how we can query our database with the Java programming language. Let's get started. In this particular video, we will learn how to write a program in PHP to query a database. So, in the first part of the video, I will give a short introduction to the most common ways to access a database in PHP. Then, we will explore the most important methods and structures of MySQL I, and in the last part of the video, I will show you a working example of PHP code to access our database. Since I will be working with PHP 7, there are two options to access a MySQL database with the common modules, MySQL I and PHP data objects. In this video, we will be using the MySQL I PHP extension to access the database. In another video in this video course, I am showing how to use the PDO extension. The MySQL I, short for MySQL Improved extension, is included in PHP version 5 and later. The advantages of using MySQL I are the following. The extension provides both a procedural as well as an object-oriented interface to work with the database. It supports prepared statements, multiple statements, and transactions, as well as a debugging interface. Overall, it provides a convenient way to access the database without using additional libraries or frameworks. So, let's dive into the usage of the MySQL I extension. The best practice to access data in a database is using prepared statements. A prepared statement or a parameterized statement is used to execute the same statement repeatedly with high efficiency. Aside from performance gains, prepared statements also protect your application from one of the most common web application security issues, the SQL injection. The prepared statement execution consists of two stages, prepare and execute. At the prepare stage, a statement template is sent to the database server. The server performs a syntax check and initializes server internal resources for later use. In the statements, there are placeholders for dynamic values. MySQL I uses the question mark as placeholders. Prepare is followed by execute. During execute, the client binds parameter values and sends them also to the server. The server creates a statement from the statement template and the bound values to execute it using the previously created internal resources. The result is then stored on the server and needs to be fetched by the client. After the execution, statements should be closed explicitly. So here is an overview of the most common methods that we call when using MySQL I to query a database. When using MySQL I to query a database, we first use the prepare method to prepare the statement with placeholders. With the bind parameter method, we then send the parameters for these placeholders to the database server, and then with execute, we execute the statement. We then fetch the result from the server using the fetch method. When using MySQL I to execute an insert, update, delete, or similar statement, we use the exact same steps, but do not fetch a result from the server in the end. Finally, after we have executed the statements and fetched our results, we close the statement with the close method. So, let's have a look at some example PHP code to better understand how you can use the MySQL I extension to access the database. Alright, so here I have my example code. In this example, I am using the extension in the object-oriented method. In the first part, I am defining my access credentials for the database. In MySQL host, I define the host where my database is running, in this example, localhost. Then I supply the username, password, and the database used in the example. After the definition of these values, we create a MySQL I object with the credential defined above. This is the main object that we will be using to create our prepared statements. Then I use the prepare method to create a new prepared statement with the question mark as a placeholder for my variables. Note that this will return a new statement object that I will be using for the rest of the methods below. In the next step, I use the bind parameter method of this new statement object to bind my placeholder to a certain value. Note that you do not need to call this method again if you change the variable ID in this case. The variable remains bound to this placeholder. In the next step, I run the statement on the database using the execute method. After the query has been executed, we need to fetch the results from the database. So, I bind the result to my variables and then fetch the result from my database using the fetch method. This fetch method is used for each row. And in this case, I will then print the results on my website. When we execute this PHP code, we receive a list of all employees in the database. So, to summarize, in this video, we saw that there are multiple methods to query our database from PHP. One of the simplest ways to query your database is using the MySQL I extension. We looked at how this extension works and what methods we usually call to query our database. In the last part, we saw an example for working with MySQL I.